Hi everybody, it's Jennifer with Genealogy Technology here, and today I am going to talk all about death certificates and how you can use them in your genealogy. Now, don't get me wrong, to non-genealogists, saying sentences like, I love death certificates can seem really morbid, and I totally get that. However, I do. I love death certificates. I just think they are a really rich and interesting resource when you are researching your ancestors. They can tell you a lot of things. They can tell you, obvious things like your ancestors' cause of death, which can be very sad. But they also tell you some non-obvious things like other people that are associated with your ancestor that you may not know about and may give you a new point of research. But one of my favorite things they will tell you too is your ancestor's birth date, their birthplace, and sometimes they will even tell you your ancestor's parents, their mother's maiden name, and the parents' birthplace. So yeah, death certificates, if you can find one for your ancestor, can be just a really great resource. First, let's go over some death certificate basics. Now, death certificates, they are fairly new. In the U.S., they are only available since the early 1900s. I think some states had death certificates as early as about 1907. Georgia really started death certificates in 1915, and some areas we didn't have death certificates really widely used until 1919 or after. So don't be looking for a death certificate, issued from the state for your ancestor who died in 1890 because that probably will not exist. However, sometimes local areas, churches, other people like that issued some sort of death. They made some kind of death record, but it was not the death certificate like we're going to look at later in this video. Something else to note is availability varies by state. Now, you can find these on sites like Ancestry.com, FamilySearch.com, or you can find them at your local state archives, things like that. But really, depending on that state's privacy laws, it's going to depend on whether you can see these death certificates or not. So for Georgia, I think we have death certificates available up to, it's either 1939 or 1940, and that might be dated by the time you see this because that is always changing. For example, sometimes the state doesn't make death certificates available until, after a certain amount of time has passed. So that's just sort of, to protect people's privacy. Now in Georgia, like I said, we can see people's death certificates up until at least 1939. Those are just publicly available for anybody to look at. In Massachusetts, on the other hand, they are a little more private. And so many death certificates from that time are not publicly available yet, and maybe they won't ever be. Now, there are other ways you can see death certificates. If you are a descendant of a person, you can go to a site like Vital Check and order that death certificate. You can also skip a service like Vital Check, which they do charge a fee, and go straight to the county to get a death certificate. But you are going to have to show some things like proof that you are the descendant of this person. So getting a death certificate can be as easy as doing an online search, or it can be as difficult as proving your identity. And that's where this last bullet point, it may cost money to obtain. You may either have to, buy a subscription to something like Ancestry, or you may have to actually go through a service like Vital Check or through your county and send in a check to get a death certificate. So they are not always freely available. I really think the best way to just see, all the great information that a death certificate has is to look at a death certificate. So here is a death certificate from Georgia. You can see right here, Georgia State Board of Health. Keep in mind that death certificates from different states will look different. A lot of times they have, essentially the same information, but they may be, they may be typewritten. You may not be able to get, the original handwritten one like this. You may only find them in an index. It really just depends on the state. We also have on here, let me scroll over to show you, we have the county where the person died. So he died in Cherokee County, this person. The militia district. Now that will help you. You can correspond this to the census if you're trying to figure out where your ancestor lived. So he lived in 792. Not sure what militia district that is. I haven't looked it up, but that's something that you could do research yourself if you are looking for this person. And then of course we have their full name. So this person's name was William Hill Millwood. The reason I pulled this one is you will see momentarily, but this was actually a really sad story. There was a tornado in the middle of the night in Cherokee County out in East Cherokee back in 1928. Later it was called the Millwood tornado because it It destroyed this house and killed many members of this family and sent other ones to the hospital. It was just a really sad story. I actually have a blog post about it on the genealogytechnology.com blog, and I will link to that in the notes here. So as you can see here, it then says his residence near Orange, Georgia. So that's East Cherokee. Sometimes this is very specific if the person has a street address, but these folks, they lived in a rural area. So it might say a rural route. It's hard to say sometimes, or it might just say like them sort of where they live near. And now if the person is a non-resident, it will say where they live. So this, somebody dies in an accident away from home or something like that, it will give their residence. Now, I really like personal and statistical particulars because it gives you good information about the person. He was a male. He was white. He was married. The name of his wife was Ida Millwood. So as you can see already, this is giving you lots of great information. It does not have his date of birth on here, but it does say that he was 54 years, 11 months, and 13 days old. So you could do that math if you wanted to go back to his date of birth. And right here, if less than 1 day, how many hours and minutes old? So that is for, of course, the infants who died very early, which can be very sad to see. And a lot of times, the only way you will know about these infants who passed away, very early, is because of death certificates. They may not even have a headstone at the cemetery, depending on how old this was. So yeah, this you can find some new information just by death certificates that way. So it also tells his occupation. He was a farmer. And here's stuff here that can really start helping you, go back in your genealogy. It tells his birthplace. So if you weren't sure where he was born, it says Georgia. The name of his father, Bethel Millwood, born in Georgia. The name of his mother, Mary Bennett, born in Georgia. Now, do not trust this stuff. You don't trust it as far as you can throw it, but we will go over that in a minute about how this stuff can be incorrect. But right now, it's a good stopping off point for you to start your genealogy. Now, here's something else that people sort of overlook that's really important. The informant. So the informant in this case was Alfred Millwood. His address was also on Orange, Georgia. The informant is the person who is giving this information about the person who has passed away. Now, this is good because it can help you realize, oh, hey, here's another family member, somebody I can look up. A lot of times this person has the same last name. So, it's pretty clear that they are related in some way. But a lot of times maybe you'll find a new family you didn't know about from the informant because they have a different last name. You could find, the brother of a woman who passed away or something like that. Or the married name of a daughter of the family. But one important thing to keep in mind too is, if this was a son or grandson or great-grandson of the person who passed away, they may not know all this birthplace, name of father, name of mother. They may not know all that information correctly. So your informant may not always be a reliable informant. That's something you just want to keep in mind. And down here is the date this was filed and the name of the registrar, and that's generally at the county. So if you go up here, this is the medical aspect of the death certificate. First, we have the date of death. That's March 28th, 1928. So that is handy. Down here, this is where the doctor generally fills out how they treated the person. So a lot of times, people die after an illness. And so the doctor will say, I treated this person since so-and-so. I last saw him or her alive on this date. And then it says the death occurred on this date above at 10:30 p.m. Now this one, since we know they died in a tornado, they probably don't know the exact time of death was 10:30 p.m. But there's nothing here because this person was not being treated by a doctor. He was, ostensibly healthy before this terrible act of nature happened. And then we get down to the cause of death. This one is interesting. Killed by cyclone. Like really, how dramatic and sad is that? But sometimes cause of death can be really good for you as a genealogist because maybe you're going to find, health issues in your family, believe it or not. For example, you see a lot of people who their cause of death is senile dementia. That could mean, maybe we have some Alzheimer's or something like that running in our family that we need to be aware of. Other people have, I see stomach issues a lot. I see kidney issues a lot. So if you see a lot of those running through your family, you may know, hey, maybe I better take good care of my kidneys, take good care of my stomach. There are other things down here like contributory. A lot of times you see this stuff just kind of written up in here, contributory. So it might say, heart heart disease, and then maybe they had pneumonia and that's what finally killed them, but they had been suffering with heart disease, that sort of thing. Also, they're trying to do their sort of early version of disease control. So where was disease contracted if not at place of death? So say, they got the Spanish influenza at an army camp. Well, they might, mention that here. Did an operation precede death? Date of the operation. Was there an autopsy? What test confirmed the diagnosis? So that's when they're really, they're trying to control diseases here. Also, it's signed by James Keith, who would have been the person issuing this death certificate. And then another important thing that can help you find more information is place of burial, cremation or removal, date of burial. Sorry, trying to read that. It's just kind of all smooshed together. But so he was buried at the Bethel Cemetery in Forsyth County, Georgia on March 30th, 1928. So that was a couple of days after his death. And then the undertaker was the Jones Mercantile Company in Canton, Georgia. They managed everything back then, so that makes sense that that's who they were. But so say you didn't know where your ancestor was buried, you can find his place of burial. Or some funeral homes are still around, have been around for years and years and years, and they still have their records available. Like Jones Mercantile Company, I know that the Cherokee Historical Society has some of their records, so you may find something about that here. So if this is sort of a mysterious death, or this is an ancestor you are trying to find out more information on, well, here are, there's probably, 5 or 6 different avenues of inquiry that you can find just from this death certificate. Of course, like with everything in genealogy, there are a few pitfalls when it comes to death certificates. We already talked about how they may not always be correct. The informant just may not know. There could be transcription errors. And also think about it. These people are generally distraught. Their loved one has just died, so mistakes can definitely be made. They can also be misleading. For example, I have an ancestor who basically grew up with his grandparents. Well, on the death certificate, it said his grandfather and grandmother were his parents. Now, of course, I know from other research that's not true, but that could have sent me, down the wrong path. And a third thing about death certificates is they can go missing. My great-great-grandmother's death certificate was burned up in a fire in the local courthouse. So just if you are having trouble finding a death certificate, make sure that some kind of disaster, flood or fire or something like that didn't happen that actually, made the death certificate disappear and you're never going to find it. I really hope that brief overview has gotten you excited to go check out some death certificates for yourself, or maybe look at death certificates you have already seen in a new light to find some new information. I have been Jennifer with genealogytechnology.com. I love making these videos for you, and if you would like to see more of these, I would really appreciate if you subscribe to my channel by hitting the red subscribe button below. You can also join my email list for extras and notifications about new videos and blog posts by clicking the link that I will put in the notes. Thanks so much.